For many of us, being attacked in our home is one of the worst things that could possibly happen. And when it does happen, the victim will never feel safe in their home again. And this is what happened to the young victims of Mr. Cruel, who has been an unidentified murderer in Australia for over 30 years. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all are doing well. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscription button down below. If you like true crime, I post about 1 to 2 videos every week, and otherwise we will get on with our case. On August 22nd, 1987, in a suburb called Lower Plenty, located in Melbourne, Australia, at about 4 a.m., a man wearing a black balaclava face mask was removing a pane of glass from the downstairs window. When he made it into the home, he entered the parents' room with a knife and a gun in his hands. He told them that if they cooperated with him, no one would get hurt, but unfortunately that was a lie. He said that he just wanted to take some items as well as money from the home. The couple rolled over on their stomachs and allowed this man to tie their feet and their hands. He also gagged them and dragged them into their closet and locked the door. As he was leaving the room, he also saw the couple's young son, who was about 6 years old, investigating to see what was going on because he heard some commotion, and he also tied up this little boy and put him in his room. This man then entered the room of the couple's 11-year-old daughter. He sexually assaulted her for 2 hours, and when he was done, he went into the family's kitchen, made himself something to eat, and then he made his way out of the home. As he left, he took a couple vinyl records and a blue coat. This family chose to remain anonymous to the media, but it is believed by investigators that the killer watched this family closely for quite some time before he entered the home. It is believed that he knew where each bedroom was located in the home, so he was able to methodically tie up the entire family before assaulting the young girl. This was a very safe area to live in the 80s, and many families felt violated and unsafe in their own homes. Police struggled with finding any evidence in the home, and they believed that they were dealing with a highly intelligent individual who was able to stay calm throughout the entire process, and was able to go through the entire home without leaving any evidence. Investigators believed that this person had committed previous crimes and he would do it again. And because it was nighttime and this man was wearing a mask, the 11-year-old girl was not able to give the police very many details about him because I'm sure it was very dark in her room and she just couldn't see. And of course, when something really terrible is going on, I feel like your mind just goes really fuzzy and it's really hard to pay attention to details. But she did tell police that while he was in her room, he did make a phone call, and on this phone call, he was yelling at someone, telling them, "Your children are next, I'm gonna get your children next." But police were able to determine that there were no phone calls made from the home during this time, looking at, of course, the family's phone records. But I do feel that maybe this was like a scare tactic. Maybe he picked up the phone and made it seem like he was talking to somebody, like fake dialed or something, or maybe just kind of picked up the phone and made it seem like he was going to hurt other people, and that would scare her because of course she was young, and I feel like that would scare me when I was young. And also, maybe this man was like yelling at her father or something like that. I definitely think that there was probably a lot going on and she was maybe just confused by the situation, but they were not able to trace any calls because there were no calls made during that time. The media started calling him Mr. Cruel, and tips did come in, but unfortunately the police struggled to find any leads. Mr. Cruel would not strike again for another year. On December 27, 1988, at around 5:45 a.m., a man named John Willis was sleeping when he awoke to a cold sensation on his head. He heard a voice telling him not to be a hero, and John soon realized that he had a gun held to his head and saw Mr. Cruel wearing his black face mask. He again gagged and bound the parents, again telling them that he was only there to take money, and if they complied, nobody would get hurt. He went through their home and cut all the phone lines before he made it to the children's bedroom. In the bedroom, he found 10-year-old Sharon, 8-year-old twins Robin and Linda, and 5-year-old Annette. And Mr. Cruel came to this home specifically for Sharon, And when he called her by her name, she was very confused and probably really scared that this strange man in her home was, calling her by her name. But investigators believe that he knew her name because the family just recently suffered a house fire and their information was in the local newspaper. So they believe that he was studying the family, probably watching their movements, and that's how he was able to find out the little girl's name. And after about 15 minutes of being tied up, the parents were able to break out of their restraints and they ran into their children's room and found that Sharon was gone. And John attempted to call the police, but the phone lines were cut, so he ran to his neighbor's house and pounded on the door and eventually woke somebody up, and they did call the police. The police searched for Sharon for about 18 hours before they received a tip from a woman who was walking outside of the Baywater High School, which was local in that town. And she was walking by the school and she saw a mound of green plastic bags sitting on the sidewalk, and she was just kind of confused. So she walked up and saw that it was a little girl, and of course it was Sharon, and luckily she was still alive and in good spirits. Sharon was unfortunately assaulted as well by Mr. Cruel, and she was not able to give police many details because she was blindfolded the entire time. But what was really bizarre about what Sharon told the police was that Mr. Cruel was very soft-spoken and spoke very kindly to her. After he was done assaulting her, he made her a sandwich and gave her lemonade to drink. And before he left her in front of the school, he gave her a bath and he clipped her fingernails and toenails. He also brushed her hair and teeth. And most likely, Mr. Cruel washed her body and cut her nails to get rid of any possible DNA evidence that may have been on her body. And Sharon's family suffered greatly from this tragedy. For many months after this, they all slept in the same room together, and John really beat himself up for years after this. He suffered really greatly and was very sad and hurt that he was not able to protect his daughter. But a local friend, a local community member, gave the family a very large dog, so they were able to finally get some rest and feel a little bit more at peace at their home, because of course, if you guys have a dog, my dog goes absolutely insane if a leaf blows by my window. So I'm sure that, this big dog would have gone crazy if anybody would have, came near their house. So, I feel like this family was really hurt by this. And I just felt really sad when I was reading statements that her father said, because he was very hurt by this. And it was really hard for him that he wasn't able to protect Sharon. The investigation led nowhere because, again, there was no evidence, and Sharon was not able to tell police much about the location she was at besides that she could hear airplanes. Almost 2 years later, on July 3rd, 1990, in a wealthy neighborhood in Canterbury, the home of the Linus family was broken into by Mr. Cruel. At 12 a.m., two teenage girls named Fiona, who was 15, and Nicola, who was 13, were awoken by a man screaming demands at them. They saw he was holding a knife and wearing a black face mask. And the girls' parents were not home during this time, and I found that very surprising that he broke into the house during this time, because he seemed to really watch the family and know exactly what they were doing. So he must have known that they normally stay out pretty late, because he seemed to always break into the homes when everybody was there, so he could, again, kind of tie everyone up and keep everyone out of the way and, take who he wanted to take. He tied up Fiona to her bed and told Nicola to get in her school uniform. He told Fiona to pass along this message to her parents. He said that her parents would have to pay him $25,000 to get Nicola back alive. He then forced Nicola into her father's car and drove off. The girls' parents, Brian and Rosemary, returned to the home only 20 minutes after their daughter had been kidnapped. The police were worried about Nicola's safety because Mr. Cruel did not leave any information about how he wanted to receive the money. They also believed that he may have had an insight into the family because they were planning on moving in just a few weeks. They were originally from England and were in Australia on business, and they were about to move back. Nicola was missing for about 50 hours, and she was abused almost the entire time she was gone. And Mr. Cruel wrapped her up in her clothing and a blanket, and she was blindfolded and left her very close to her home in her neighborhood. He told her not to remove her blindfold until she heard his car drive away, and once she heard his car pull off, she quickly ran to a neighbor's house and then was reunited with her parents. Nicola told police the same thing Sharon did, that she was blindfolded the entire time and she could hear airplanes. Although Nicola did see a small peek of him and she saw that he had reddish brown hair, his black balaclava up close, and it had white stitching around the eyes and mouth. Like he stitched it up close enough so he could see out of it, but no one could see anything but the iris of his eyes and teeth. Nicola was bathed and her nails were clipped just like Sharon's. Mr. Cruel's crimes became worse over time, and on April 13th, 1991, he broke into the home of John and Phyllis Chan. The couple owned several restaurants and rental properties, so they worked almost all day. They often worked around 18 hours each day and were often not home with their children. On this day, their 13-year-old daughter, Carmen, was babysitting her two younger sisters, Karen and Carly. At 9 p.m., Carmen entered the kitchen to make a snack and saw a man standing in her kitchen wearing a black mask and holding a large knife. He told her the same thing that he told his other victims, that he was only there for money and no one would get hurt. He told Carmen to show him where the money was, and he grabbed Carly and Karen by their hair and shoved them in a cabinet that he then put a large piece of furniture in front of so they could not easily escape. When the girls were able to free themselves, they found that Carmen was gone and the words "more to come" and "payback" were spray painted on their car. This investigation led police to believe that Mr. Cruel may be a police officer himself because he was efficient in knowing how to cover his tracks and leave no trace of evidence. Police believe that the words spray painted on their car was a diversion to waste investigators' time on a dead end. The words made it seem as if the Chans may have angered someone in their professional life, but so many people were questioned and it was determined that that was not the case. A press conference was held about 72 hours after Carmen was missing, and the police were very worried by this point because Mr. Cruel's longest victim was held at 50 hours, so this was almost an entire day longer than Nicola was held. Almost a year passed and no signs of Carmen until a man was walking his dog at Edgar's Creek near Thomastown on April 9th, 1992. He saw a lifeless body laying on his path, and police determined it was Carmen and she had been shot. Investigators theorized that Carmen may have been able to pull off Mr. Cruel's mask or her blindfold, and she may have seen his face, so he decided to kill her to avoid his capture. He shot Carmen 3 times execution style, and her body had been laying outside for several months. And at this point, police believe that there are no other crimes that were committed by Mr. Cruel after this point, that maybe murdering Carmen was something that he didn't want to do. Maybe he just wanted to, assault young girls, which is obviously terrible on its own, but maybe he didn't want to carry that on to murder. So they believe that maybe that shook him up and he didn't want to commit any more crimes because he was, afraid or maybe worried about getting caught. But they do believe that he committed several other assaults before the 11-year-old girl. And so they haven't released what cases they are. They haven't released who these victims are, but they do believe that he committed several other crimes prior to that. So they are still working on linking him to those cases. Investigators believe that Mr. Cruel may be a school teacher and may have possibly known the students and had access to the records. The crimes he committed also took place during the school breaks, so he would have ample time to commit his crime. Police describe Mr. Cruel as a highly intelligent individual who was very thorough in the execution of his crimes. And at one point, it was believed that the Golden State Killer may have also been Mr. Cruel before Joseph James D'Angelo was caught. They believe that maybe he traveled to Australia from time to time and committed these murders, especially because they were, gapped out. They weren't like back to back. But this was obviously determined that this wasn't true, and the Golden State Killer was questioned about these crimes. But it is very interesting that they put that together, because that does happen. Israel Keys did travel. They do believe that he traveled to Mexico and to Canada and potentially other countries to kill other people, and then, you know, he made his way back to America. So that's not completely unheard of, even though it is a bit of a stretch. But his crimes were pretty similar to the early crimes committed by the Golden State Killer, when he would primarily break in people's homes. It is believed that Mr. Cruel recorded his crimes and took photographs as well. I'm not sure if police have discovered these videos and is working on tracing them to their origin, but it was written in several articles I read about this case. This case has gotten some more attention recently because 60 Minutes Australia did a special, and a witness stepped forward with details about Mr. Cruel. A woman who was a close neighbor and friend of Sharon said that her neighborhood was very secluded and there were power lines all along the back of this neighborhood, and you could not easily see over the fences to the homes. Basically, you would have to know about this neighborhood to break into these homes. And again, that may lend into the fact that Mr. Cruel may be working in the school system. He may have been a teacher, and he knew exactly where Sharon lived. When this woman was a young girl, she saw a man recording over the fence at Sharon's home. She approached him and was caught off guard, and he ran off. After Sharon was kidnapped, the witness told her mother, and the police did not come to the area to gather any evidence. Many years later, investigators came to survey the area, but they were only there for a very short time, according to the witness. This man was wearing a long baggy flannel and blue jeans, and he was very unkempt. He was about 5'9" and heavy set. He had a round face and was balding on the top of his head, but he did have longer hair on the sides and had pale skin. And I'm hoping that this new special that they did on 60 Minutes does bring some more relevancy to this case and does spark some new interest, because this is absolutely terrible, and I'm quite sure that he did this many other times. And I do think that the cases that they, potentially have linked to him, he probably did them because, nowadays they're able to link crimes much easier due to the methods and evidence and things like that. So, I do hope that these victims are able to get some justice, because it's absolutely terrible what happened to them. It's terrible to be in your own home and be assaulted and be a young child and taken away from your home and murdered. So this is just so sad, and I really hope that eventually they do find Mr. Cruel, because they do believe that he's still alive, because this wasn't that terribly long ago. And by this point, maybe he is an older man, but he still deserves, his time in court, because what he did was absolutely terrible. So if you guys have any information about this case by chance, I will put the phone number on the screen right here, and I will also put it in the description. It is for Crime Stoppers. Please call them if you have any information in regards to this case. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you found this video helpful or interesting, please leave me a comment down below and give me a like, and let me know what other cases you guys would like me to cover in the future. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great day and take care, and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.